Lieutenant Marcus Webb had exactly 14 minutes left to live, and he was completely at peace with it. The evacuation of Research Station Theta-7 had gone wrong in every possible way. What should have been a routine withdrawal ahead of an incoming solar storm had turned into a nightmare when the transport ships arrived early and launched in a panic, leaving half the personnel stranded. Marcus, as station security chief, had stayed behind to make sure everyone else got out. Almost everyone. He found her in Lab 6, where the blast doors had jammed during the evacuation. Through the reinforced window, Marcus could see Dr. Lyra Veltash frantically working at the control panel, her orange skin pale with fear, her blonde hair disheveled from hours of desperate effort. She looked up when she saw him, and the hope that flashed in her amber eyes nearly broke his heart. Marcus checked his radiation counter. The solar storm's leading edge would hit in 14 minutes. The lab's shielding would hold for maybe 5 minutes after that. Then the radiation levels would cook anyone inside, human or Veltharian. The station's main computer had already declared Lab 6 a lost cause. The blast doors were fused shut by an electrical surge, the override controls fried. Standard protocol was to seal the section and write off anyone trapped inside. Marcus had never been good at following protocol. "Dr. Veltash," he said through the intercom, "step back from the door." Lyra's voice came through, static-laced but clear. "Lieutenant Webb, what are you doing here? The evacuation is over. Everyone else made it out." Marcus was already pulling cutting equipment from the emergency locker. "Everyone except you, and I'm not leaving until we fix that. The storm hits in 14 minutes, I know." Marcus fired up the plasma cutter, watching it cycle through its startup sequence with agonizing slowness. Plenty of time. It was a lie, and they both knew it. The blast door was reinforced titanium carbide composite, designed to contain a catastrophic lab failure. Cutting through, it would take at least 20 minutes with proper equipment and a full crew. Marcus had a hand-held plasma cutter and 14 minutes, 13 minutes now. "Lieutenant Webb, Marcus, you need to leave." Lyra pressed her hands against the window. "There's an escape pod in section, see you can still make it. And leave you here, not happening." Marcus positioned the cutter and started the first cut. The metal glowed white-hot, melting away in agonizing slowness. "Besides, Section C is on the other side of the station. I'd never make it in time. Then you're going to die here because of me. I'm going to die trying to save you. There's a difference." 12 minutes. The cutter bit deeper, but Marcus could already see it wasn't going to be enough. The door was too thick, the equipment too slow. But he kept cutting anyway because the alternative was giving up, and Marcus Webb had never quit anything in his life. "Why are you doing this?" Lyra's voice was thick with emotion. "You barely know me. We've worked on the same station for 6 months and spoken maybe a dozen times. Doesn't matter." Another section of door melted away, revealing the reinforcement layer beneath. Marcus's heart sank, but his hands stayed steady. "You're a person, you're in trouble. That's enough." "It's not enough to die for." "That's where you're wrong." 11 minutes. Marcus worked in focused silence, his world narrowing to the white-hot line of the plasma cutter and the slow progress through impossible metal. Behind the door, Lyra had stopped arguing. She just watched him work with an expression that made something in Marcus's chest ache. 10 minutes. The first layer of the door finally gave way. Marcus immediately started on the second layer, his muscles screaming from holding the heavy cutter steady. Sweat poured down his face despite the station's cooling systems. "Marcus!" Lyra's voice was soft now. If this doesn't work, if we don't make it, I want you to know that what you're doing means everything. No one has ever cared enough to try. We're going to make it, Marcus said, though his radiation counter was screaming warnings at him now. The storm's first waves were already hitting the station's outer shields. 9 minutes. Tell me about yourself, Lyra said suddenly. If these are our last minutes, I want to know who you are. The real you, not just the security chief who follows regulations and files reports in triplicate. Marcus laughed despite everything. Not much to tell. Career military. Joined up at 18, worked my way through the ranks. No family to speak of. Parents died when I was young, raised by the service. Is that why you're so ready to sacrifice yourself? Because you don't think anyone would miss you? The question hit harder than Marcus expected. Maybe, or maybe I just believe some things are worth dying for. 8 minutes. Like saving a Veltharian scientist you barely know? Like saving a person who deserves to live. 7 minutes. The second layer of the door was giving way, but too slowly. Marcus could feel time running out like sand through his fingers. His arms were trembling from fatigue, his vision blurring from the heat and exertion. Marcus, stop! Lyra's voice was gentle. Please save yourself. There's still time if you go now. No. Marcus, I said no. The force of his own voice surprised him. I'm not leaving you, Lyra. I'm not walking away. So either help me figure out how to get you out of there or accept that we're in this together. Silence. Then, the door's emergency release. If you can cut through to the hydraulic system, I might be able to trigger it manually from in here. 6 minutes. New plan. Marcus adjusted his angle, cutting toward where the hydraulic lines should be. The plasma cutter was overheating, throwing warnings he ignored. His hands were blistering inside his gloves, but he kept cutting. 5 minutes. There, Lyra's voice rose with sudden excitement. I can see the hydraulic line, if you can just cut through that last section. Marcus pushed the cutter harder, and it finally gave up, the safety systems shutting it down to prevent catastrophic failure. He threw it aside and grabbed a manual cutting torch, his hands moving with desperate speed. 4 minutes. The radiation counter was solid red now. Marcus could feel the storm's energy building outside the station's shields, a pressure that made his teeth ache. Almost there, he muttered. Come on, come on. 3 minutes. The last section of metal gave way, exposing the hydraulic line. Lyra immediately began working on it from her side, her fingers flying over the manual release mechanism. Got it! The door shuddered, groaned, and began to slide open with agonizing slowness. 2 minutes. The gap was barely wide enough for Lyra to squeeze through, but she didn't hesitate. She grabbed Marcus's hand, and together they ran. The escape pod in Section B wasn't supposed to work. It had been marked for maintenance weeks ago. But it was their only option, and Marcus prayed to every god he'd never believed in that the engineers had been wrong about the extent of the damage. 1 minute. They dove into the pod, Marcus slamming his hand on the emergency launch as alarms screamed throughout the station. The pod's systems were half dead, struggling to activate, and Marcus could see the radiation readings outside climbing to lethal levels. 30 seconds. Come on, Marcus whispered, his hand finding Lyra's and gripping tight. Come on, please. The pod launched. It was the roughest launch Marcus had ever experienced, the damaged systems barely able to generate enough thrust to clear the station. They tumbled through space, the pod's navigation completely offline, but they were moving, getting distance from Theta 7 just as the solar storm hit with full force. Through the small viewport, Marcus watched the research station light up like a dying star, its shields overloading in cascades of energy. If they'd been inside. "We made it," Lyra whispered, her voice full of wonder. "Marcus, we actually made it." Marcus started laughing, the sound slightly hysterical. They were alive, drifting in a barely functional escape pod with no navigation and limited life support, but they were alive. Lyra turned to him, and before Marcus could process what was happening, she pulled him into a fierce hug. "You saved my life," she said against his shoulder. "You risked everything, your life, your safety for me. I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me," Marcus said, but he didn't let go. "I just did what anyone would." "No." "Most people wouldn't. Most people would have followed protocol, would have saved themselves." Lyra pulled back to look at him, her amber eyes bright with unshed tears. "But you didn't. You stayed. You fought. You refused to give up on me even when it was hopeless." "It wasn't hopeless. We got out. Because you made the impossible possible." Lyra's hands came up to frame his face, her touch gentle. "Marcus Webb, you changed my life today. And I'm going to spend the rest of it making sure you never regret that choice." Over the next 6 hours, as they drifted through space waiting for the rescue beacon to bring help, Marcus learned more about Lyra Veltash than he'd learned in 6 months of working on the same station. She was brilliant, passionate about her research into renewable energy sources. She was funny, with a dry wit that caught him off guard. She was kind, constantly worried about whether Marcus was comfortable in the cramped pod, despite the fact that she'd been the one trapped for hours. And she was interested in him, not just grateful, but genuinely interested in who he was, what he thought, what he wanted from life. "I never wanted to be anything but a soldier," Marcus admitted, floating in the zero-G of the disabled pod. "It was all I knew, all I was good at. But lately I've been wondering if there's more." "Like what?" "I don't know, something that matters, something that makes a difference." Lyra smiled. "You made a difference today, you saved my life." "One life in the grand scheme of things." "One life is everything," Lyra interrupted. "It's my life, Marcus, my research, my dreams, my future. You gave all of that back to me. How is that not significant?" When the rescue ship finally found them, Marcus expected that to be the end of it. A dramatic story to tell, a commendation for his personnel file, maybe a handshake from Lyra before they went their separate ways. He didn't expect Lyra to refuse to let go of his hand as they were brought aboard. Didn't expect her to insist that she wouldn't give her statement to the investigators unless Marcus was present. Didn't expect her to turn down transport back to Veltharian space, saying she had unfinished business in human territory. "What business?" Marcus asked, confused. Lyra smiled at him. You're my business, Marcus Webb, if you'll have me." 3 months later, Marcus stood in the arrivals terminal of New Terra Station, waiting. His military career was officially over. He'd resigned his commission to take a position as head of security for Lyra's new research facility. It was a lateral move in terms of prestige, but it meant working alongside her every day, and Marcus had discovered that was worth more than any promotion. Lyra emerged from the transport, and Marcus felt his heart do the same stupid flip it had been doing every time he saw her since that day in the escape pod. She spotted him immediately, her face lighting up with a smile that made him feel like the luckiest man in the galaxy. "Did you miss me?" she asked, dropping her bags to hug him. "You were gone for 3 days, Lyra. That's not an answer." "Yes," Marcus admitted, "I missed you terribly." "Good." She pulled back to look at him. Because I have news. The Veltharian Science Council approved our joint research proposal, full funding for 5 years. That's incredible, Lyra. That's everything you've been working toward. Not everything. Her expression turned serious. Marcus, I need to ask you something. When you saved me on Theta 7, you said some things were worth dying for. Do you remember? Of course. I've been thinking about that, about what's worth living for, and I realized. She took his hands. I realized that I want to live for you, with you, building a life together, doing work that matters, making a difference one day at a time. Marcus felt his throat tight. Lyra, I'm not finished. You gave me back my life that day, and what I want to give you in return is a future, a real future, not just duty and regulations and serving until you're too old to be useful. A future where you matter not because of what you can do, but because of who you are. I don't deserve. Stop. Lyra's grip on his hands tightened. You deserve everything, Marcus, and I want to spend every day proving that to you, if you'll let me. Marcus looked at this incredible woman, this brilliant, beautiful, stubborn Veltharian who'd somehow decided that a washed-up security officer was worth her time, and felt something shift inside him. For 20 years, he'd believed his life had one purpose: serve, protect, eventually die in the line of duty. It was a simple equation, clean and uncomplicated. But Lyra had shown him something different. She'd shown him that life could be more than duty, that he could be more than his job, that one person caring deeply could change everything. Yes, he said simply. Yes to all of it, the research, the future, building a life together, yes. Lyra's smile was radiant. Then we should probably discuss living arrangements, because commuting between our quarters is getting ridiculous. Marcus laughed. Move in with me. I thought you'd never ask. As they walked through the station together, hand in hand, Marcus thought about that day in Lab 6. About cutting through an impossible door with impossible odds, refusing to give up even when failure seemed certain. He'd risked everything to save her. And what she'd given him in return, hope, purpose, love, a future worth living for, had changed everything. Some things Marcus had learned really were worth dying for, but the best things were worth living for. And he planned to spend the rest of his life proving that to both of them.